Bert had said at one time, he's told me that if Hal had been a woman, they probably would have had a great marriage. So I've spent the better part of the last 20 years in the television news business. I've done other jobs off and on. My MO basically is, well, my first news job I worked for 13 years, but then I will take like a year or two and do something random. Like I've built police cars. I was an animal enforcement officer for the sheriff's office. I worked the parks counter at a Chevy place. And right now I'm a manager of a movie theater. So it just kind of comes and goes, and I just kind of do whatever. But it's afforded me a lot of opportunities over the years to meet and get to know people that I've always wanted to meet and get to know. I've met several presidents. Michael Vick, when he was the quarterback for the Falcons, took me to the strip club one time. I've had a lot of great adventures, but probably the most meaningful to me was getting to meet and become friends with Burt Reynolds. Now, Burt, we all know and love from all of his films, like Hooper, but Cannonball Run, obviously, Smokey and the Bandit, that one musical that he did, not Best Little Whorehouse, but there's another one that he did that was not good. But the town I was in, Macon, Georgia, has a film festival. It was originally called MAGA. They changed the name. I don't know why. But they brought Burt in for a screening of Gator. Gator was, of course, shot in Georgia. It's the sequel, sort of a loose sequel if you really look at it, because there's a lot of differences between Gator and White Lightning, but it's a sequel to White Lightning. White Lightning was shot in Arkansas. When they were shooting Gator, Hal Needham and several people in the crew had brought Coors beer, and at the time, they couldn't get Coors in Georgia because it's not pasteurized, and they didn't have a brewery here, so they couldn't really ship it. And the maids started stealing the Coors from the hotel and selling it, and they asked why. That they explained that they could sell it for $75 a case. This is back then, $75. And that was why Smokey and the Bandit happened. That was the inspiration for Smokey and the Bandit, because of Gator. So the film festival brings Burt in, and before they bring him in, somehow our station got an exclusive access to the festival. So I got to do a phone interview with him. And had it not been for that phone interview, I don't usually get starstruck, but I think I would have been completely starstruck the first time I met Burt had it not been for doing the phone interview first and kind of breaking the ice. So he knew I was a fan, and he knew I was somewhat knowledgeable. I knew who Hal Needham was. Most people that interviewed Burt Reynolds did not know who Hal was, unless they were specifically interviewing about one of the earlier films. When Burt came to town, I did an interview. I did a few just regular softball questions, how you find the city, that sort of thing. Then I started really asking about some of the minutia of his relationship with Hal Needham, like how they became friends. Hal was a stuntman, and I think it was Riverboat was the first time they met, if I remember right. But basically in those days, the way stuntmen worked were they would come in, wardrobe would hand them their costume. He'd say, well, who am I doubling today? And the director would basically be like, go down and find somebody dressed like you, and that's who you're doubling. And it happened to be Burt. And they became really good friends. They ended up being roommates. The story goes that Hal went through several wives, and after one relationship ended, he went to Burt's house and asked if he could sleep on the couch for about a week, and that week ended up being about 4 or 5 years. It was also during that time that, Smokey and the Bandit and Cannonball and all that stuff happened. So anyway, Burt comes to town, and I do the interview, and I'm talking about Hal and Stunts Unlimited, and I really think in the time since that initial meeting, from what I've gleaned, I really think I never got the chance to meet Hal. But I really think that Hal and Burt, if they could have switched places, they would. Burt really enjoyed doing the stunts, doing the physical work, but he was smart enough to realize that he was going to make more money as a superstar Burt Reynolds. And Hal always felt unappreciated and unrecognized, and I think that, seriously, I do think that if they could have both made the same money and swapped places, they probably would have. And Burt had said at one time, he's told me that if Hal had been a woman, they probably would have had a great marriage. So Burt and I are doing the interview, and the interview's starting to wrap up, and I asked him if I could get a photo with him. And he was like, sure. And I said, well, hang on a second. Now, everyone in the Cannonball community knows Matthew has this impeccable Captain Chaos outfit. It's great. He looks amazing in it. I did not know him at that time. I wasn't involved in the community at all at that time. I don't know if I was even aware of the community, but I had a Captain Chaos costume that I would wear at Dragon Con and other nerd events. So I had brought the hood, the jacket, and the cape with me, tucked away in my camera bag. So I asked Bert if I could get a photo. He said, sure. I said, hang on. I go, I put Chaos on, I come back out, and he gets absolutely hysterical. Now, this was later in Bert's life. He was not doing super well, and he very nearly fell out of his chair because he was laughing, which would have been tragic. Like, he could have easily broken something. Fortunately, he didn't. We got a photo together. He ended up putting it up on the Burt Reynolds Institute for Film. He told me that, and I'm sure people have taken pictures with him in costume before and since, but I think I was the only news reporter to ever do it. And so it really struck a chord with him. He thought that was really funny, and his manager gave me Bert's cell phone number, and we weren't like best friends, don't get me wrong. It's not like I slept over at his house or anything, but we would talk occasionally, like every few months. And one of the things that we talked about was the movie that he was shooting in Tennessee, The Last Movie Star, which I believe is actually his final film. He had some other stuff that was in pre-production that I don't think he ended up getting to make. But The Last Movie Star is not a biopic, but it's very, very close. The guy that wrote it was a huge Burt Reynolds fan, and so Burt basically plays this character who is a superstar, who is now up in age and is coming to terms with basically being near the end of his life. And he gets invited to do this film festival, and he thinks it's this big prestigious film festival, but it's this really small film festival that's run by some kids, and he's having a hard time with that. He feels washed up, and there are some scenes where he's dreaming and he's talking to his younger self, and those are at then current Burt composited in with young Burt in Smokey and the Bandit and in a scene in Deliverance, talking to himself. It's great. I will cry like a little baby when I watch that movie. It's very powerful, but it's one of Burt's best performances outside of Deliverance, honestly. When we were talking about doing the movie, he had some trepidation about it because it was so similar to his life. And there's some very fictionalized things, like the character has a wife who's in a nursing home and he kind of breaks her out for like a last hurrah. And he knew, I think, what it would mean to the fans. He was just worried about it being misconstrued as this was actually him. Like, for example, the character went to college in Tennessee, and Burt, did not. Burt did have a promising football career, but he tore his ACL in high school. And that's actually what led to him acting. Was after he was injured, he didn't know what to do, and his drama teacher wanted him in some play. And Burt was like, I've never acted in my life. And the drama teacher was like, oh, just come on and audition. And gives Burt the script. And Burt looks at it and goes, and he goes, you got the part. Because he just looked just like what the director had in mind. But Burt's manager called me after he passed away. I was on kind of a short list of people that he called to inform. So I got to hear it straight from him. People say never meet your heroes. And a lot of people had negative experiences with Burt over the years. I thought that he was just a gem, and he seemed to think a lot of me. But one of the people who had negative experience with Burt was Lady Pam Yates. And we talked about this briefly during the Cannonball reunion. I asked her a question about Burt, and she mentioned that he was a bitter man. And he could be. He very much could be. I don't feel that he felt that he ever got the recognition he deserved, even though he was widely loved for a long, long time. But towards the end of his life, people considered him a wash-up or failure and stuff like that, has been. But that makes me go back to, there's an album that William Shatner did with Ben Folds, and one of the songs is called Has Been. And there's one lyric in there that speaks volumes about Burt. Has been does not mean failure. Has been was. It has been could be again.
When you get a ticket, it might look something like this, but the first thing that you need to do is take a picture of that ticket and send it to 305 305. That will get the ticket clinic on your case immediately. They've got brick and mortar offices in Georgia, Florida, and California, but they can help you find a ticket no matter where you get it in the United States by helping you find a local attorney that will do everything they can to help you avoid costly fines, insurance premium increases, points on your license, risk of suspension, even jail time. They've helped me out with this ticket and many others, and a lot of my friends as well. So check them out now at the link in the description below, or again, text your ticket to 305 305 to get the ticket clinic on your case. They are the perfect partner in your fight against any speeding ticket.